I said to myself, "Come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good." But that also proved to be meaningless. "Laughter," I said, "is madness. And what does pleasure accomplish?" I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly, my mind still guiding me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was good for people to do under the heavens during the few days of their lives. I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired male and female singers and a harem as well, the delights of a man's heart. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all this, my wisdom stayed with me. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired, refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for all my toil. Yet, when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. Wisdom and folly are meaningless. Then I turned my thoughts to consider wisdom and also madness and folly. What more can the king's successor do than what has already been done? I saw that wisdom is better than folly, just as light is better than darkness. The wise have eyes in their heads while the fools walk in the darkness. But I came to realize the same fate overtakes them both. Then I said to myself, the fate of the fool will overtake me also. What then do I gain by being wise? I said to myself, this too is meaningless. For the wise, like the fool, will not be long remembered. The days have already come when both have been forgotten. Like the fool, the wise too must die. So I hated life because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. All of it is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. I hated all the things I had toiled for under the sun because I must leave them to the one who comes after me. And who knows whether that person will be wise or foolish. Yet they will also have control over all of the fruit of my toil, into which I have poured my effort and skill under the sun. This too is meaningless. So my heart began to despair over all of my toilsome labor under the sun. For a person may labor with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, and then they must leave all they own to another who has not toiled for it. This too is meaningless and a great misfortune. What do people get for all the toil and anxious striving for with which they labor under the sun? All their days, their work is grief and pain. Even at night, their minds do not rest. This too is meaningless. A person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. This too I see is from the hand of God, for without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? To the person who pleases him, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and happiness. But to the sinner, he gives the task of gathering and storing up wealth to hand it over to the one who pleases God. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind.
So what do you think? 2 weeks ago, we started Ecclesiastes, and I remember at the end of that sermon, just looking out at the audience, and like half the people just had their heads facing the ground and wouldn't even look up. It's like, whoa. Because there's some dark stuff here that he's dealing with. So I'm going to retrace a little bit of it. I want to set up a little bit of what he says here, but then I want to talk about the answer. Okay, I want to talk about the answer that he is indirectly pointing towards, okay? Because he's revealing a problem, and there is an answer to the problem. So, are we all familiar with the term midlife crisis? Yeah? No? I am familiar with the term midlife crisis because I happen to be right at that midlife point in life. And I can tell you that the term crisis is appropriate. It does fit. You do sort of hit at this point in your life this sort of sense of a little bit of crisis as to what's it all about. Because you've done so much and you get to the point of realizing that all that I've done, I'm not going to be able to replicate. I'm not going to be able to get back to those sorts of levels, those sorts of heights, that sort of energy and sense of accomplishing things by just sheer energy, purpose, and will. I'm past that. And you actually start to realize, not only are you past it, you're actually on a rather significant decline. That's what you start to realize. And you look at everything you've done and worked so hard for, and you start to ask yourself, is that what it was all about? Was that it? And I'm sort of heading out the door now, and it's over? You sort of get that sense, and there is this great tendency in the midst of that to sort of grab at one more great hurrah before you head out the door, which is what typically is considered and termed midlife crisis. It's kind of what Solomon's going through. To be honest, that's sort of what he's going through. We're going to cover a little bit of the stages that lead up to this, and because he does. It's exactly what he does here. So 2 weeks ago, we started this introduction to Ecclesiastes. You remember, it's written and based upon Solomon and his life. He's now older in life. He was one of the richest, if not the richest man in the world of his time. He was the wisest, particularly in his younger years. And people from other nations around would come to him for advice. And as his life goes on, he accomplishes so much, and towards the end of his life, he also starts to become one of the most unfulfilled people in the world. And the theme of Ecclesiastes, the book of Ecclesiastes, written later in Solomon's life, the thesis is, and I quote from him, meaningless, meaningless, utterly meaningless, everything is meaningless. Nice thesis for your life's work, huh? Meaningless, meaningless, utterly meaningless, everything. You want to say it together? No? Not so much, right? And the reason Solomon has come to this conclusion is because he has come to this point of viewing everything, the everything that he's talking about. When he says everything is meaningless, he is talking specifically about life under the sun. That's what he's zeroing in on. That's what he's brought his life to focus upon. Simply life lived on this earth, on this world, period. That temporal life span that we get here under the sun. Life that is only the physical. Life that is only human. And only engaging in the 5 physical senses that we have to live out here under the sun in this world. That's what he's coming to the conclusion of, that if you view it from just that, it's meaningless. In other words, life without that connection with God, meaningless. Life without that spiritual fulfillment, meaningless. Life without the eternal becomes meaningless in the end. He's lost. You see, Solomon has largely lost, or at least he's deeply exploring. If he hasn't lost it altogether, he's deeply exploring what life is like without God, just under the sun. Forget about life above or beyond the sun. He's stuck right now in this life, this sensory life under the sun. And last week we plunged into this. We talked about work and the whole cycle of nature being just repetitive and redundant. We talked about history and one's legacy that they leave behind, and how when one dies, they're forgotten fairly quickly after they die. And he just starts to see all this meaninglessness in the course of life. But Solomon doesn't stop looking for meaning just there in those things. He pursues wisdom as well and defines that while wisdom's better than folly, it's in the end kind of meaningless too, and it does not provide the answers. That's what he's saying, is wisdom and knowledge and education doesn't provide the answers. In fact, I think he's saying that it actually creates more questions. Knowledge and wisdom actually creates more questions. It brings up this whole question of what is truth anyways? And everything starts to become relative. And what is morality anyways? And everything becomes challenged. And there's no absolutes anymore. And it's all philosophical in this rigmarole back and forth, and he's getting sick of that. So he goes, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go for pleasure now. Forget wisdom for a while. Let's go after folly and fun and frivolity. Let's try that for a while. And that's what he plunges into in this part of it. So he's frustrated. He's disappointed. So now he sort of cuts himself loose in a raw and unrestrained, almost reckless, no holds barred pursuit of pleasure. Essentially, it's eat, drink, and be merry. If it feels good, enjoy it. Indulge in it. Why not? Why not? He says he seems to be thinking that at least feelings and pleasure and sensuality are real and tangible, right? This is all this wisdom and philosophy and lack of any realities in all of that, or absoluteness in all of that. He goes, I've had enough of that. I'm just going to grab on to what simply feels good. And I'm going to go after that and see what kind of meaning I can find in that. So the pursuit of wisdom was somewhat fruitless for him, but hey, might as well at least try the whole intense pleasure party scene and see where that takes me. And I find it very interesting the way Solomon introduces this section on the pursuit of pleasure. In chapter 2, verse 1, right? He says, I thought in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure, right? I thought in my heart. In other words, what he's saying is, I thought to myself. Inside of me, I came to this conclusion myself. I determined for myself, by myself, this is what I'm going to pursue. I thought in my heart. And it's interesting to me, as I was thinking about that, how many poor decisions are made when we limit our thinking to ourselves. When we limit our decision-making process to ourselves, right? Decisions that we even kind of know are wrong, but we kind of want to do. How do you arrive at choosing to do that? You think to yourself. You know what you don't do? What you don't do is go to a mentor and say, here's what I'm thinking, what do you think? You know, you don't do that because you know that you're going to get some very wise, experienced sort of wisdom speaking into that says, no, don't do that. And here's why. So we tend not to do that when we make these kinds of decisions. We limit our thinking to ourselves within our own hearts. What you don't do is go to your pastor and say, hey, here's what I'm thinking. You know, there's this orgy going on, and I'm thinking about having an affair, and I really want to do this because I think it'll turn me on and give me some life. Hey, you don't do that. People, I don't ever have someone coming to me with that kind of stuff. When we make those kinds of decisions, we make them to ourselves within our own hearts, apart from good, wise, or godly counsel. You know what else you don't do when you make decisions like that? Is you don't pray about them. Man, that's something you just don't pray about. You don't take that to God and say, God, I'm going to open my heart to you. Here's some of the things I'm thinking. What do you think? Because we know what the answer is going to be. No. These are the things that we think to in our own hearts and come to conclusions in our own hearts. So that's what he's doing. That's what he's doing. Thinking to himself, thinking apart from anyone else, because the goal here is to justify. That's really the goal here, is to justify, to convince oneself to make this decision, to do what you kind of know you shouldn't. So he thinks to himself, and he decides to pursue this unbridled, reckless pleasure, to give in to all desire, right? That's what he's going to do. Wine, drunkenness, every material possession you could imagine, pleasure, the resources to do anything and everything that you want. That's what he has at this disposal. What I'm saying is he's going to take a really good run at this. Okay? That's what I'm saying. He has the capacity to take a really, really, really thorough run at this. And he goes for it. He goes for it. So I was intrigued by this, and I was directed. So I've also been looking, sort of following through Solomon's life as well, reading in 1 Kings. And if you go to 1 Kings chapter 4, you can find this section in chapter 4 that covers Solomon's daily provisions, is the subtitle that it says. This is what he consumed daily. Okay, daily, every single day. So here's what, I'm just going to read little excerpts of chapter 4, 1 Kings. The people of Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sands of the seashore. Listen to this. They ate, they drank, and they were happy. The king is setting the tone here for the whole nation, is what's happening here. That's sort of the way things were. There was peace, there was incredible prosperity, and this is where everyone's kind of ending up along with the king. And it goes on to say Solomon's daily provisions were 30 cores. Now, I didn't know what a core was. Looked it up. 30 cores is about 5.5 tons. Okay? 5.5 tons of the finest flour, and 60 cores, that's 11 tons, of meal, cornmeal. 10 head of stall-fed cattle, 20 head of pasture-fed cattle, and 100 sheep and goats, as well as deer, gazelle, roebucks, and choice fowl. Every day, you guys. That was his daily provision. Solomon had 4,000 stalls for chariot horses and 12,000 horses. The district governors, right, of Israel, each in his month supplied provisions for the king. For King Solomon, and here it is, and all who came to the king's table daily. They saw to it that nothing was lacking. Point is, Solomon at this point in his life is into this incredible, consumptive, daily grind of intense pleasure and party. That's what's happening. It's like he is throwing this insanely massive party every single day, day in, day out. Now, I mean, it might be that for 3 days he doesn't throw that big of a party because he wants to throw a really insane one 3 days later. So he stores up those daily provisions for 3 days and then just blows them all on the massive party. But that's kind of where he ends up. That's what's going on. These were Solomon's parties, right? I mean, he knew. Part of what I want to suggest to you is that he knew how to do this. And he did it to an extreme that none of us will ever match. So, that just sort of bring your own meat barbecue party that you had in your backyard, where it's, BYOB, because I don't want to supply drinks for everybody, so BYOB. That's nothing. This is a whole nother stratosphere of partying that Solomon is involved in. And he pursues this for a period of time in his life. And even when he's pursuing this, and he admits it's sort of folly, he says that his God-given wisdom still stayed with him, even through all of this. In other words, it's like he couldn't but help to look deeply at all that he was experiencing and all that he had attained and all that he was enjoying. He couldn't help but to go through all of that and at the same time ask himself, truly, honestly, deeply ask of himself, is this really it? this really what it's all about? Is this the meaning and the purpose and the value of life? And will it not just all be gone and lost when I'm gone? That's sort of the godly wisdom that's still stuck in his head, that's toiling through his mind, even as he's going through all of this stuff. So it's almost like Solomon then sort of gets to this point in his life where he goes, well, that insanity of partying and pleasure and foolhardiness, it's fun, but it hurts too. It's hard too. It's kind of hard living too. And he gets to this point where he's almost like, no, I got to do something more with my life. I got to kind of make something more of myself than just that. And that's sort of the next phase of life that he steps into and thrusts himself into. So you can call that almost like the partying phase of his life, because chapter 4 of 1 Kings is pretty early along. And then he sort of thrusts himself into this whole establishing and building phase of life, right? He's not the college kid cut loose partying it up at school anymore. Now he's like, now I got to make something of my life. Now I got to do something productive. And oh my goodness, does he do stuff productive? He outproduces everybody. He builds for himself, and it covers at the beginning of the passage homes. He spent 14 years building his house. And it was the biggest, most impressive mansion of its day. 7 years building the temple, right? The house for God gets 7 years, I get 14. That's kind of the way he's rolling. And then he builds like houses, well, they're kind of more like apartments for his 700 wives. Because they got to hang out somewhere too. I'm not going to put them all in my mansion, so they got to build an apartment building for them. And then he starts planting, right? You got a house, you got a mansion now, you got to put gardens around it, right? And he doesn't just do a garden. He essentially plants a forest around Jerusalem. This was one of the hugest projects that Solomon was involved in, was foresting the area around Jerusalem. In fact, if you even go today to the area southwest of Jerusalem, there are these pools dug in the ground, like cisterns dug in the ground, in the rock, actually, and they're called the Pools of Solomon. And they were the pools that he dug, and they still sit there today in order to irrigate that area so it could grow massive forests. And that's the next phase of his life. He's moving on now. I'm going to try this production, and I'm going to enjoy and find the pleasure in just being productive and building and establishing and accomplishing. And that's what he sort of stretches for after the sort of party, the cut loose party phase. And then the final phase that he sort of reaches out to, and this is sort of getting deeper sort of into the whole midlife crisis thing, although it all kind of sounds like midlife crisis, but now he sort of reaches this, I've done it all, now I'm going to enjoy it. Now I'm going to lay back and just enjoy everything that I've built and done and accomplished. And I'm just going to live in luxury. And he does that. And he's got his homes, he's got his forest, he's got the temple for God, he's got Jerusalem, and he's got all this wealth and ease. He's got slaves. He's got thousands of slaves. In fact, he talks about the slaves and the slaves of the slaves. That is their children. So he's got generations now of slaves that do everything for him. I mean, he can literally live in the lap of luxury now for the rest of his life. And you know what? Solomon wasn't one of these rich old men that's miserly. Not by any means. I mean, he has no fear at all of exhausting his wealth, so he has no fear at all of spending his wealth and sucking every bit of pleasure and enjoyment out of it as he can get. And he does. He does. What he is able to enjoy is not just ease and comfort, but literally uninhibited pleasure and ecstasy. That's what he has. That's what he has. So let's just quickly review this. He asks God for knowledge. God gives him wisdom and knowledge. He is not satisfied with that. as he digs more and more into knowledge. He gets frustrated with that. He goes into the party and the folly scene, and then from there he moves into this acquisition and building phase of his life, and now he's into sort of semi-retirement, just soak in the luxury and the pleasure phase of life. And he says in verse 9, that he became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before him. i.e., he has fame, he has power, he has greatness, and he's popular. I mean, yeah, throwing those parties like that day after day for thousands. He's popular beyond imagine. And Solomon also notes again that his wisdom stayed with him. And that's a gift from God, that his wisdom stayed with him. And what he realized in the midst of his wisdom staying with him was that really none of this is doing it for me. None of this is doing it for me. The wisdom of God won't let him get away from the fact that this is not satisfying and itching my core needs and desires for life and in life. Now, it's not that it wasn't pleasurable. He seems to very much admit that. He says, I refused my heart no pleasure, and it was pleasing. My heart took delight, he says, in all of my labor. Yeah, it was fun. It was thrilling. It was exhilarating. Yeah. Enjoyable, to be sure. Solomon had a great time. And he experienced intense pleasure physically from all of this toil and work that he was doing and enjoying. But where did it get him in the end? Something drastic just continued to be lacking that he could not seem to fill with the experience and the thrill that he was pouring into his life. It was eluding him. Something was eluding him. In other words, you could almost say, well, how did that work for you, Solomon? All those pursuits, how did they work for you? Well, I think we can answer that ourselves. Because I think we kind of get an understanding in our own lives for how this works ourselves. I mean, when you party, it's fun. Yeah, there's thrill and there's excitement. When the party's over, then what? Right? Then what? Then you start to focus on the next party. Exactly. The next party. That's what happens. That's sort of what this breeds. One thrill to the next thrill. And then what? Well, then we got to set up another thrill. And another high. Because that's what it ultimately is. This is an emotional, spiritual, chemical, whatever. High. And you start to live from one high to the next high, to the next high, to the next high. And then what happens with the times in between the highs? Yeah, low, man, depressed, sucks. It sucks. And all you can think about is, I got to get to the next high, right? And you start living for the next high, which makes all the time in between the highs just this awful, desperate, almost dead, unbearable stretch of time where you just gotta get to the next high. And that's what he's getting stuck in. And he has the capacity to stack these things up behind each other pretty quick. But he can never stay there. He can never stay there. It's like that for that foolhardy party kind of lifestyle, but I think it's very true for the great accomplishments and the impressive acquisitions of life too, is it not? That kind of sort of rolls down the same road to a large degree. I remember getting, and I'm going to ask you guys to think about this. Do you remember the first car you ever owned? Man, I remember my first car I ever owned. Oh, it was enlightening to have this car. It changed everything in my life. It was a 1960 Rambler. It was mostly white, but it had a baby blue hood and fender and a black roof. And it was a piece of junk. It went through 1.5 quarts of oil for every tank full of gasoline. The brakes you had to pump once, twice, and they'd start to work, and then 3 times, and you'd get some action out of them. And I drove this thing for, I think, about a year before I totaled it, right? Because that was inevitable. 1 pump, 2 pump, rear end the guy. And a little dent in my car, but that's the kind of car that you get, a flat tire and it's pretty much totaled because it's just not worth fixing. So I lost that car, and there went my dream, But then you know what I got? You know what? I got a better used car. And man, when I got the better used car, that other piece of junk, man, you wouldn't have caught me dead in something like that anymore because I had elevated. I had stepped it up, right? And now I had a nicer used car. And then one gets a nicer yet new used car, and then you kind of start to get sick of new used cars. And then you go, you know what I really need? I really need a new car. That's what I really need. I will be happy if I can get a new car. And you get your first new car, and it's like, well, it's not a really impressive new, because it's your first new car. It's like a Chevy or something. A Chevy, it's like, oh man, this is amazing. I'm not going to have to do anything but change the oil for like 2 years. This is how a car should run. But you know what? After 2 years, guess what it is now? It's a used car now, yeah. So you drive it for a few years, and it's like, now it's just a used car again, and it's starting to have repairs. Now I need another new car. And now you're going to step it up a little bit higher. You're not going to get a Chevy now. Now you're going to get an import, right? Now you're going to get your first brand new import, and you get like a Toyota or a Honda or something. It's like when you move from the Chevy Cavalier to the Honda Accord, it's like, oh, this is how a car is supposed to run. Oh, wow, this is what they can really do. They actually turn really quick when you turn the wheel. They just, woo, woo, woo. It's amazing. But after a few years, guess what that car is? It's a used car now. And now you got to ramp it up a bit more, so you get, now you're going to get your first brand new import European car. Why? Yeah, maybe a Volkswagen or a Mercedes or whatever. And why? Because it's better? Because it runs better than the Honda? No. It's because it costs more. Therefore, it has a higher status label attached to it. That's really the only thing about it. And you drive that for a while, and it becomes a used car. See, the point is none of this stuff lasts. None of this stuff holds you anywhere there. It all starts to deteriorate the moment you possess it. The moment you grab hold of it, it starts to age and wear out and break down. And it never keeps you there. There's always the next thing. There's always something more. And from there you go to what? I don't know. Where do you go to? Then what? Sort of the big question is, then what? What, the boats? Planes? I don't know. It just keeps getting more and more and more. And it never really satisfies. It never lasts. It never scratches our ultimate itch. It's never enough. It's always temporal. That's the point. It's always just a temporal thrill. The high subsides, and you got to look for and start to chase after the next thing, and then the next thing. Cars are like that. Partying's like that. Houses are like that. I mean, do you remember your first apartment? The first apartment you ever rented by yourself? It's like my space. It's like so amazing. I've got my own space. And it's wonderful for a while. And it's like, I only rent this. I got to buy something. I got to own something. I got to put down a better, deeper footprint than just that. I need a condo. And then it's like, what? Now I need an apartment, or a townhouse or something. And it's like, well, but now I don't want to share property, so I need my own plot of land, maybe a little house with a yard. And you get that, and it's like, that's great for a while. And then what do you need? Then you need a big house with no yard, right? It totally flip-flops. And you get a house that fills the entire footprint of the property with almost no yard at all. And somehow that's better. And it's a thrill, and it satisfies for a little while. But there's always something bigger. There's always something more. And the things that we possess are always getting older. And the shine is wearing off of them. And the thrill is disappearing and dissipating. And man, Solomon's had the homes more so than we've ever had. If getting bigger and better is going to ultimately satisfy, Solomon is proof that that's not true. I mean, gardens, a guy had a forest, a full literal forest. Never mind the little vegetable garden that we put in, you know? And oh man, wives. I can just see how it started with Solomon. He's dating his first girl, you know, as a teenager. Eventually they get married, and oh my goodness, this is awesome. This is just awesome. I'm going to get another. I'm going to get another. And he gets 2, he gets 3, he gets 5, you know, in his first year. I can just see him, you know, and Hugh Hefner talking. You know, and Hugh's got his 5 blondes in the Playboy Mansion. He goes, 5. He goes, man, I married 5 girls last month. You know? That is just last month. And Solomon's resources were so vast and extensive that his pursuit of pleasure, in his pursuit of pleasure, he literally began to run out of fantasies. That's how well he could do it. You know, blonde, brunette, short, tall, skinny, fat man, whatever he wanted. Unbridled. 50, 100. It ended around 1,000. Yeah, 700 wives and 300 concubines. He couldn't. And Solomon, in all of that, we're reading here in all of that, what he becomes is utterly frustrated. Because all of this stuff, all of everything that he has, it in the end just becomes like anything else, routine, predictable, pedestrian, and mundane. And he's still not anywhere near actually being satisfied. In fact, it only seems to have awakened a deeper and deeper hunger for him, thirst for him. There's always got to be so much more. So, that's essentially kind of the passage. What do we do with this? What are we going to do with this? So here's the first thing I want to point out. And this is important. Man, I think this is actually really important. The first thing that I want to point out, that this passage and everything that Solomon is doing in the book of Ecclesiastes, it is not an attack on pleasure. Okay? This is not an attack on pleasure. This is not some kind of a God hates pleasure sort of passage. Not at all. Not at all. Pleasure is actually a good thing, not a bad thing. The idea that God hates pleasure and that if we don't live dull, boring lives as Christians, he's going to send us to hell, that is not of the Bible. That is not Scripture. And that's not what we should get from this experiment that Solomon's running for himself. The truth is, God created pleasure. You realize that? It's God who created pleasure. It was his idea in the beginning. Pleasure. Hey, let's make these people so they enjoy things and that pleasure is a big motivation for them. That was God's idea. That's the truth. That was his ideal. I mean, just think about it. Just think about the whole creation story and the Garden of Eden sort of thing and the lushness of the Garden of Eden, the beauty of the place, the provision and abundance of the place. And then he creates male and female, Adam and Eve, and he puts them in the garden naked. Like, what's that all about? You know, what do you think's going to happen? He puts them in this amazing, sensual place, naked. And the obvious starts to happen. And God actually says, he says it's good. And he declared it to be, he pronounced it to be good. In fact, he even says to them, he gives them this instruction, be fruitful and... Oh, how do you think that happens? Yeah, how do you think that happens? It's not like God is up in heaven looking down on this and going, oh my goodness, look what they're getting into. How'd they figure that out? This is not a design flaw in creation. This is the design. This is what was expected. This is what he created. This is how he wanted it to work. And it was supposed to be pleasurable. And that's good. He basically puts them there and says, go and enjoy, frolic, have fun, enjoy each other. And it's all good. I was thinking about the same sort of thing with wine, you know. Wine, that was not a creation or design flaw either. It was intentional as well. I mean, so many passages in the Bible speak about good wine as being a blessing from God. And somehow in the church it's gotten just a bad reputation. It wasn't supposed to be like that. It wasn't supposed to be like that. It's not like God, again, is looking down from heaven and sees these people collecting these grapes, and he's going, what are you doing with those grapes? You're just going to let them sit there? They're starting to go bad. You're going to waste a bunch of good. Oh, look at what they figured out. It's not like that happened. He knew that. He built it like that. He designed it like that. And it was supposed to be good. We were, in fact, created as sensual beings. Does that shock you a little bit? Does that surprise you a little bit? We were designed to be sensual beings. That's why we have all these sensual perceptors built all into our body. He created us like that. He gave us eyes so that we can sense sight. He gave us ears so we can sense hearing. He gave us skin so that we can sense feel. Noses so we can sense smell. Tongues so we can sense. Those are all sensory perceptors. That's what makes us sensual beings. And the things that feel good, look good, taste good, smell, we like them. We're attracted to them. He made us like that. He designed us to be like that. And if something is pleasurable to our senses, guess what? We like it. We're supposed to. That's the way we were designed. It stimulates those senses, and they become enjoyable. And that's not a bad thing. This is all God's idea and God's plan. God is actually the author of pleasure, not the enemy of pleasure. And too often I think he's being made out to be the enemy of pleasure. He's not. He's the author of it. It's what he created, ordained, and declared to be good. Now, having said that, let's get to the obvious. To be sure, some, and in some cases even much, pleasure has been corrupted in our world. Right? We know that too. And corrupted by sin, ultimately. It's the source of the corruption. But still, don't condemn pleasure because the world has learned how to corrupt it and abuse it. That's not right either. In fact, that's sort of doubly wrong now. Now we're doubling up on wrong. 7th century philosopher and mathematician Blaise Pascal writes, an intriguing man, but this is one of the things he wrote quite a bit about, actually. He writes this, and I think he's very, very right and true in what he says. He says, all men, women too, he says men, but he means women too. He says, all men seek happiness. Right? We do. I think that's universally true. He says, this is without exception. Whatever different means, we come up with different means to pursue it, but with whatever different means they employ, they all tend toward this end of happiness and pleasure. The cause of some going to war is this, and others avoiding it is this. It is the same desire in both, attained with or attempted to attain through different means. He says the will never takes the least step without this objective in mind of happiness and pleasure, of attaining happiness and pleasure. He says, this is wild. He says, this is the motive of every action of every man or woman, even even of those who hang themselves. That's what they're trying to do too. It's true. So behind all of what he is saying is that pleasure itself isn't the problem. How we pursue it can be, for sure. We were built and designed for pleasure. But how we scratch that itch, of course, does matter. Physically and emotionally, that's a big part of us. We were designed for pleasure in large part. At least the physical and emotional part that God created of us was very much wrapped around the pursuit of pleasure. It's a big part of the design, for sure, to experience and to pursue and to be happy and to feel pleasure in life physically around us. It moves and motivates so much of us, doesn't it? Doesn't it? As I was thinking about it, I'm going, yeah, of course it does. That's why we like comfortable furniture, right? That's why humanity and humans aren't still sitting on rocks and logs and sleeping in the gravel. Because we have this desire to pursue comfort and pleasure and good sensory feels. That's why we bother to make furniture and lazy boys and memory foam, right? You gotta love that stuff. Pleasure moves and drives us towards those things. That's also why we're attracted to relationships and spouses to share our life with, because it feels good. That's why we like warm baths on cold days and cold beverages on hot days. We crave those things for that very reason. And that's not bad. None of that is bad. It's the way we were built. And here's the thing, and too often the church has done this, to just deny or condemn pleasure because some in the world have twisted it and abused it is simply going to leave us under an uneasy weight of prudish shame and guilt in the end. And it's unnecessary. Certainly from God's perspective, it's unnecessary. Oh, am I skipping some here? Yeah. So it's part of the way God made us. Solomon's conclusion here, however, is that in the end of it all, this doesn't work. In the end, just the pursuit of pleasure does not work in the end as the answer to our deepest needs in life. That's what it doesn't do. And that's where we, human beings, the world sometimes in generally, falls short in trying to meet those needs with that strategy. Right? Solomon's right. As a focal pursuit, he's right. As the object of life, he's right. As the ultimate thing in life, he's right. Those are not the things that satisfy. There needs to be something of a balance here. Right? There needs to be. You see, the reason there needs to be a balance is that we are not just physical, emotional, sensual creatures. We are that, but we're not just that either. We're spiritual creatures as well. In fact, I would say we are spiritual creatures first and foremost. To a huge degree, we are spiritual creatures with spiritual needs too. That must be balanced into the whole equation of how we find our needs met. So C.S. Lewis does a good job of addressing this in one of his great books. It's actually a sermon that was turned into a book called The Weight of Glory. And if you want to read something really good this summer, read The Weight of Glory. Okay? Write it down, The Weight of Glory. And he is attacking this whole idea, too, that the church has too often put on pleasure and desire as being simply wrong. So he says the New Testament has lots to say about self-denial, right? But not about self-denial as an end in itself. We are told to deny ourselves, to take up our crosses in order that we may follow Christ when we must. And nearly every description of what we shall ultimately find if we do so contains an appeal to desire. Right? If there lurks in the most modern minds the notion that to desire our own good and earnestly hope for it, or for the enjoyment of it, is a bad thing, he says, I submit that notion has crept in from philosophers like Kant and the Stoics and is not a part of the Christian faith or scriptures. Indeed, if we consider, so consider this, if we consider the unblemished promises of the unblemished promises of reward and the staggering nature of the rewards and promises of the gospel, it would seem that our Lord finds our desires not too strong, but actually too weak. We are, in fact, half-hearted creatures, fooling around with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered to us. We're like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in the slums because he simply cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at the sea. We are, in fact, far too easily pleased. That's our problem. That God actually has this level of pleasure that is so much greater and more fulfilling that he offers and wants for us, but we settle for something so pedestrian, something so temporal, something so broken, really. That's what Lewis says is the problem. We settle far too easily for physical and emotional and temporal pleasures rather than plunging with God, plunging much, much deeper inside of our spiritual selves to seek and to trust God to satisfy what we really, really are craving. That's where we miss it. Too often when we people are looking for satisfaction and fulfillment, we are stuck in this idea. And that is that what I really need to satisfy myself is just more of what I already have. Right? That's where we get stuck. If I can just get more of what I already have. That felt kind of good, so I just need to get more of it. That felt kind of good, I just need to get more of it. And that'll ultimately fulfill my life. Just get more and more and more of what I already have and what I'm able to attain. That's what we get stuck in. Let me propose another thought for you. Let me propose for you a whole other thought. And that is the idea for us that what we really need to find happiness and fulfillment is not just more of what we already have, but something that we do not yet have, something humanity was designed for as well, but lost. Something beyond the physical and the emotional, something beyond the temporal, something that is in fact spiritual and eternal, and something that gives us ultimate meaning and purpose to all of life, including the physical things and the pleasure of them. It gives us perspective and meaning and a right place to put all of that stuff to. Solomon, you see, was trying to satisfy that spiritual vacuum in his life by stuffing with more and more and insanely more of what just can't do it, of what just doesn't fill that void. More physical, sensual, temporal, emotional stuff, trying to fulfill an eternally deep, deep, deep God-shaped space in his heart and in his soul. And it's not going to work, Solomon. He's realizing that. No matter how much I stuff into it, it's not going to work. That's what Ecclesiastes is teaching us. That's what Solomon is teaching us. It takes, you see, something else to satisfy this spiritual need. Something that we cannot conjure or achieve or build is needed to fill that God-shaped space or hole in our spiritual selves. And I'd be like, come on, what fills a God-shaped space? God. Yeah, God fills a God-shaped space. And that's the answer. That's the solution. So let me close with a really quick just story from the New Testament. What time is it? Really quick story from the New Testament, John chapter 4. This is the story of the woman at the well. That's right. She is a Samaritan woman. And she is, in fact, a woman of some ill repute. She's had multiple relationships in her life. She is actually currently, when Jesus meets her, she is currently exchanging sexual favors for a place to live. That's where she's at. And she's been deep down that road. Really deep down that road. She's an outcast in her own society. In fact, she goes to the well. She's the woman at the well. She goes to the well in the midday, the heat of the day, when nobody else goes to the well. Everybody else in town goes to the well early in the morning when it's cool. And you got to haul your water all the way back, at least in the cool of the day. And now you got cool water to drink all day. She goes in midday. Why? To avoid everybody. That's why. So that she will not have to endure the scorn and the rolling of eyes and the detestment that she gets every time she's out in public. So she goes in, but it just so happens that Jesus and his disciples are traveling through Samaria, and they stop at the well. And Jesus decides to stop at this well. And then he does something rather peculiar. He sends all of his disciples into town. You guys go into town, I'm staying here. Go get us something to eat. Bring it back here, I'm staying here. And it's like, well, that's kind of weird. Why don't you just come with us, Jesus? And Jesus said, no, you guys go. I'm staying because I got an appointment. I know what's going to happen. Jesus is like that, right? He's like that. He knows what's coming. He's going to meet this woman, and he knows it. And she needs to meet him, and he knows it. So he meets the woman. She comes to the well. He's there by himself conveniently now. He starts to talk to her, which in itself is odd because strange men didn't talk to strange women in those days. Just didn't happen. And what's even more is a proper Jewish man didn't talk to a Samaritan at all. Never mind a woman. Never mind a woman of ill repute. But Jesus is talking to her because that's the way Jesus is. And he talks to her. And he, like he always does, he's going to take this conversation in a spiritual direction. First thing he does is he asks her for water. She's got no cup. Can you get me some water? Her pail to draw the water with. She draws him water and gives it to him. He drinks the water and goes, "Whoa, that was good." I'm paraphrasing, right? He goes, "That was good." And but Jesus wants to turn this into a spiritual conversation. So he starts to pursue this spiritual direction of this conversation about water and about how we crave things for life. Like we crave water, right? We crave water, especially in a hot, dusty place like Palestine. And Jesus says to her, he says, when you drink this water, you're only going to thirst again, right? The thirst is just going to come back. That's what happens. When you drink earthly water to satisfy physical needs, thirst's just going to come back again. It's never really going to ultimately, permanently satisfy. It's always going to keep returning, and you have to keep drinking more because you're going to keep thirsting again. And he says to her, however, I want to offer you some water. And if you drink of this water, you will never, ever thirst again. And at first, she doesn't really know what he's talking about. And she says, well, how can you offer me water? You don't even have a pail. I had to draw you water, remember? You have a pail, how can you give me water? And he goes on and keeps talking to her about what he means. And it's like, yeah, we all need to address our physical needs, and those things drive us to a degree, and yet that's part of what we do in life. But they are not the ultimate answer to life and to purpose in life. He goes, you got to go deeper for that, and that's what I want to offer you. Again, she didn't get it at first, but she starts to get it. it's not just the water that Jesus is talking about here. You see, he's indicating to her all that other stuff that she's trying to fill her life with too. He's talking about all the men of her life.